Hi everyone, I have a tag video for you today. I just saw this over on Paulina's channel, but the creator of the tag is Rachel Stephanie. I will link to both of their videos down below. So this is called what is it actually called? The Evaluating My Eyeshadow Palette Collection tag. I love talking about eyeshadow palettes and tags are a lot of fun, so I thought this would be fun to film. The first question is, what was your first eyeshadow palette? Now, I can only really remember the first high-end palette I have in my collection. I didn't purchase it because somebody got it for me, but I'm sure that I owned some of those awful CoverGirl or Revlon palettes back in the 90s or something like that, or maybe even a really terrible Wet n Wild one back then. But I don't have those anymore, and I don't even really remember what I owned. So I'm going to talk about the palette that really kick-started my palette collection, and like most people, it's the Urban Decay Original Naked palette. Now, I just mentioned that I didn't buy this myself, and that's because this was not available in Canada for quite a while when it first launched. I think it took a few months before we finally got it, and then it was sold out everywhere. So my dear friend down in New York managed to pick this up for me and brought it up to Canada when she came for our wedding. Well, it was kind of our second wedding, I guess. We got married at City Hall in 2010, and then we had a full wedding in 2011, and she came up for the full wedding in 2011 and brought me up this palette as a gift, and I was so freaking excited. I just couldn't believe that there were this many colors in a palette. Like, at the time, I was really only buying MAC eyeshadow singles, and it was expensive. It was so much money to pick up just one eyeshadow, and then all of a sudden I've got 12 eyeshadows in, I don't know what it would cost at the time, maybe around 40 bucks, 45. Oh, so excited. This is the only palette that I've ever hit pan on. I've hit pan on Virgin and Toasted, and that's because I just use this so much. This is still the palette that I reach for when I go to a job interview, just because I really like one specific look that I put together with this palette. So yeah, this was the first one that I ever got. It was a gift from a friend. I will keep this until I finish all of the shadows, which may honestly never happen, but yeah, like most people, this was my first palette. So the next question is, which palette do you use the most? And this is honestly kind of hard to answer because this answer has changed so much over the years. Several years ago, I would have told you that this was my most used palette because there's pan on it, but I don't reach for that one that often now. So if I had to think in the last 6 to 7 months, my most used palette has to be the ColourPop Chasing Rainbows palette. Now, this is not definitely my most used palette out of everything that I own, but it is the one that I have gravitated towards the most in the last half year, 3/4 of a year. I love this thing. It came out for the holidays last year for ColourPop, but they still have it available on their website, thank heavens, because this is one of my favorite products that they make. And it's sort of a rainbow palette, but they're missing a few shades in here. Like, there's no red, there's no green, but the aesthetic of a rainbow is here, and it's a lot of fun to play with. I like how there's a lot of matte shades, but the shimmers really complement those matte shades. Every time I wear a look with this, I'm just so pleased with how it comes out. In fact, I've ignored some of my newer palettes to play with this one just because I know the color combination is going to come out so nicely whenever I put something together with this one. I brought this with me on vacation to England and Ireland when I was there back in May. I wore this for 8 or 9 days straight and never got tired of it. I was always discovering new eyeshadow looks when I had it at that time because I only had the one palette with me. So I loved being able to focus on it that way and just discover new things with this palette. There's one look I always go back to, and that's putting Manifest It through the crease, Eclipse on the lid, and then Keep It Cool on the outer corner. It is beautiful. I love that look so much. So this one has definitely been my most used palette most recently. The next question is, if you had to get rid of one palette right now, which one would it be and why? So I routinely get rid of eyeshadow palettes now because if I'm not using it in my collection, I don't want to keep it. Generally, there are some exceptions, but I've just been starting to get rid of a lot more palettes. So I'm not going to talk about something that I've gotten rid of already because that would kind of defeat the purpose of this. But when I was looking through my shelves, I was like, what don't I use and what would I not miss? And the first one that stuck out was the Urban Decay Naked Heat palette. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with this palette. The shadow quality is good. I love the colors on the inside. The problem with it is that it's a one-note palette. And given that there are 12 shades in here, that's a horrible thing to say. Like, it really makes no sense that there are 12 freaking eyeshadows, and every time I put together a look with this, it looks the same. It doesn't matter if I completely change which colors I'm using, if I use only from the dark end and grab something from the lighter end, or if I stick in the middle, or it doesn't matter. It does not matter. Every time I put together an eye look with this, it's beautiful, but it's the same thing, and that doesn't make any sense because there's 12 shadows in here. Honestly, I love the color scheme in here, but it's not enough variety. This could have been cut down to a 6-pan palette and it would have been perfectly fine that way. So I don't really want to get rid of this because I do occasionally reach for it, but it was the first one that came to mind where I was like, I probably wouldn't miss this if I got rid of it. Question number 4 is, do you have a deep emotional connection with any of your palettes? Which one and why? So the Urban Decay Naked Original palette, that is quite an emotional connection because it was my first palette and because a dear friend brought that up to Canada for me. But I figured I should give you a different answer just to give a little bit more variety. And I'm going to talk about the Too Faced A Few of My Favorite Things palette. So this came out for Holidays 2013, so quite a long time ago. It's an absolute beast of a palette. There's so much product in here. There's 20 eyeshadows, you get 2 bronzers and 2 blushes. And I think it came with some horrible flat brushes that I just got rid of because they served absolutely no purpose. So the reason that this palette is so special to me is twofold. Number one, this kind of introduced me to the world of Too Faced. And after I bought this palette, I started to find myself really interested in the brand and the products that they were putting out. And I was just really drawn towards their overall aesthetic. Not so much now, that has very much changed, but at the time, this kind of opened that world for me. And the other reason that this is special to me is in 2013, I was buying a lot of makeup, but I was buying a lot of cheap makeup because I wanted more volume rather than quality. And I was getting a lot of products, but they weren't necessarily all stuff that I was loving, and I was kind of just annoyed. Then I kind of gave myself permission to buy this palette. I'd hemmed and hawed over it because it might have been 70 bucks. Like, it felt like a lot of money back then. And I was like, okay, well, just pick it up. And then I loved it so much. And I was like, you know what? Maybe it makes more sense to spend more money on items that I truly want as opposed to spending less money on more items that I don't necessarily all love. So it just kind of changed my mind around my makeup purchases and just kind of convinced me that, you know, it's okay to go out and buy a more expensive item if you're going to like it more than the 10 other items you could have purchased with the same amount of money. And that kind of basically started my palette addiction, which who knows if that's a good thing or not. I definitely spend far more money on eyeshadow palettes now than I used to. But I find I like the things a lot more in my collection if I've spent a little bit more money on it and if I know it's something that I'm going to like more. So I do tend to be a little bit more selective with my purchases now. That may not necessarily have been the case when I first opened my eyes to spending a little bit more on eyeshadow palettes, but this one was just, it's a special memory for me. It opened my eyes to Too Faced as well as just buying larger palettes in general. And palettes for me, eyeshadow palettes in particular, have really been where my love of makeup is centralized. So this was kind of, you know, a gateway drug, so to speak. Oh, also, I really do like the quality of this palette and I still reach for it all the time. That's why I still have it in my collection. I think it's fantastic, and I know that a lot of Too Faced holiday palettes have not been great in recent years, but this one was excellent, and as I said, I still reach for it. The next question asks, which palette was the biggest waste of money? Well, I got another Too Faced one for you. This horrible palette. It's in my declutter pile, so somebody at the office will be receiving this palette if they should want to keep it. But this is the Too Faced 20th Anniversary Then and Now eyeshadow palette. It was a whopping, was it 70 bucks Canadian or 75? It was a horrifically priced item. It is massive, it's like huge, it's cumbersome. And I've mentioned this recently in a declutter video, but I mean, I just don't like it. The concept was cool. They launched their original 10 eyeshadows on the top in a new formula, but the colors are still the same. And then they kind of made 10 new shadows that were supposed to be like a retake on the original color. But honestly, they didn't change them enough. There's not enough variety. There's not enough mattes in here. It's a bomb full of glitter shadows and chunky, horrible to use formulas. Too Faced does great eyeshadows in general, and this one just turned out to be an absolute mess, and I really don't know how they managed to do that, because in general I would say that their eyeshadow quality is good, and this one was just crap. It was just pure crap, to be honest. I never reached for it. I think I did a review video on it. I didn't really think much of it at the time, and I haven't reached for it since. I honestly should have just taken it back to Sephora, because it was just an utter disappointment. So this one was definitely the biggest waste of money in my entire collection. Question number 6 is, which palette was the biggest surprise to you? And it could be one that you thought you were going to love and then hated, or one that you didn't think you were going to like but then loved. And this was easy, because I thought this palette was going to be so boring when I got it. It was sent to me by PR in a package of other items, and I just thought, honestly, like, you're so dull. Like, I have no interest in you. But I ended up loving it, and it is the Tarte Tartelette in Bloom palette. This thing, I mean, when you look at it, as somebody who's a color lover, you look at this and go, oh, why? But I mean, neutrals are flattering, and I was not using this palette, so at one point I was like, okay, just bring this with you on a 3-day weekend vacation getaway and force yourself to use it, because otherwise it was just sitting on my desk and I was like, I'm not reaching for you because I do not care about your colors. But I brought this with me on a brief 3-day vacation, and I was so impressed. Not only with the formula, but also the color range in here is really nice. So there really are only 3 shimmery colors, which is good. I always prefer mattes. The shimmers are Rocker, Firecracker, and Funny Girl, and the rest of them are all mattes, and they're the right kind of tones for me for neutral shadows. I really like something that's a little bit more of a deeper medium brown shade for the crease, a more deeper, it's warmer tone too, deeper warm brown for the outer corner, and then I'll take like any shimmery color and throw it on the lid. And these colors just on the lid look beautiful. They're easy to use, they blend nicely, the colors are seamless, and they all really work well together. So this was a palette that I absolutely thought I was going to get absolutely no use out of, but as it turns out, it's a really lovely palette and one of the easier ones to put an eyeshadow look together with. So this one definitely surprised me. Question number 7 is, do you have a palette you never reached for? Which one and why? This one kind of makes me sad, because there's one in my collection that I definitely don't reach for, but I know I like it, so I need to use it more. So that's this one by Zoeva. This is the Matte Spectrum palette. I got it in Australia when it was 2 years ago. Oh, that's so sad. So I picked this up at Sephora in Australia, in Sydney, because Zoeva is not available easily in Canada, and I wanted something a little bit special for my vacation. And I like the color scheme in here. It's another rainbow palette, but they're more muted and they're all matte shadows. And I thought that this would be great to use as matte shadows for when I need a little bit of a deeper outer corner color, because that's where I prefer to put matte shadows. And honestly, I did use it that way, but I just forget I have it. It's one of those things where it's like, you're beautiful, I love the shadows, the quality is fantastic, but I just never remember that I have it. I've got over 100 palettes in my collection, so it really is only my fault, but I just never think to grab for this one. I need to put it out on my desk, but I say that about a lot of palettes, and then all of a sudden I've got 20 palettes sitting on my desk, and I'm like, okay, well, this is not reasonable. So this is lovely. I mean, the quality is fantastic. I love the colors in here. They blend nicely, they apply well, but I never reach for it. And the very last question is number 8, and it asks, do you have any palettes where you love all of the shades? And honestly, I thought this was going to take me a while to figure out, because I mean, we've all got palettes in our collection where it's like you like 90% of the colors, but there's like a few of them in there where you're just like, oh, you're absolute duds. But then as I was looking through my library of palettes, I was like, nope, I know which one I'm going to talk about. And that is the Violet Voss hashtag palette. There is not a single bad shadow in this palette. They are all so freaking lovely. So I always describe this as a sunset or sunset palette because the shades just really look like a beautiful sunset. And there is nothing that's wrong with this palette. Honestly, there's nothing wrong. The shadow quality is excellent across the board. I love all of the colors in here. Truly, this is a perfect palette. The only nitpick I could really make is that the two orange colors are very similar, but I like them both, so there's definitely nothing inherently wrong with that. The shimmers perform like, oh, they're butter. They're just so nice to apply. They're smooth, they're luminous, and then the mattes are excellent. I truly have nothing bad to say about this thing. This is one of my favorite palettes in my collection, and it makes me so happy whenever I use it. So yeah, out of 100 palettes in my collection, there's not a single dud color in this one. And it's funny, in a collection that big, you think you should be able to say that about more palettes, but truly, this is the only one that everything is good in. I pulled out other palettes and I was just like, oh, but I don't like that one, or I don't like that shadow. Like, there's always something a little bit wrong with each palette. Not this one. This one is perfect. All right, so that is it for the tag. I had a lot of fun answering the questions about eyeshadow palettes because they are always fun to talk about. Thank you so much for watching today's video, and I will see you next time. Bye.